This is our second webinar in a series that I'm doing for the Department of Education. So the Department of Education has offered the opportunity to do these workshop webinars, which is kind of great. And so we have 6 blended learning webinars, which we started last month, and we have 6 in the student-centered. And this is our first webinar about station rotation using digital learning in the student-centered one. So I'm excited to have everybody here, and it looks like we have a lot of people that are repeats. So that's awesome. I love when we have a following. So y'all know a lot about how we do this and how we get through this. So I appreciate y'all coming back. That tells me that you've had a good time and you're enjoying what you're doing. So thank you for coming back. For those of you that are new and this is first time with you, my name is Kim Loomis. I retired from Clark County School District in 2019. So for some of you, the name or the face might be familiar. But they say when you retire, you've got to follow your passion. And I got to tell you, my passion was my job. I loved online and blended learning. And so now I get to do it at a national level. I was just in last week in Anchorage, Alaska, helping them out. I'll be in Arizona here shortly. And here, look, I'm working with you guys in Nevada. So this is kind of fun. So I appreciate you guys being here and having this following. I hopefully you guys can join us for all 12 of the workshops. Like I said, the flyer we'll talk about towards the end. I know most of you have already found it, and I've got people that have signed up for all 12 of them. So thank you for joining us. Today's agenda is we'll start with a little bit about student-centered learning because that's what our series is. What does that look like? And then we're going to talk about how to blend with station rotation, bringing in that digital content to cover some of the load, right? If you were with us last month, you know, we talked about partnering with digital content so that we don't have to carry everything. And that's the nice thing about station rotation. Again, when we do station rotation, we're not going to have to carry all the delivery of the instruction. We're going to have our kids take ownership of their own learning. So we'll talk a lot about student ownership, and then we'll talk about planning for stations. And if you really like this workshop and you want to take it deeper, or if you like this webinar, if you want to take it deeper, we do have a Canvas workshop, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get going. So I like to say that the core business of schools is relationships and learning. And I got to tell you, this is a hierarchy. Relationships come first, right? Kids come to school. I hate to say this because I'm an educator. I love kids. I love educating, but I know that they come to school so that they can interact with each other. They can interact with other adults. And so that's really important for us to have those relationships first before we start learning. So if you think back to the beginning of the school year, hopefully you took those first early days developing those relationships before you actually kicked into your content area. And you got to remember that some of us are onboarding kids every day or once a month or whatever. Remember, we want to build that relationship when they come in, and especially when they come in late like that, you want to make sure that this is where station rotations are so great, that they can build relationships with their peers. So today, as we move forward, think about how this works in the relationship realm. So speaking of relationships, one of the things when we start releasing learning to our students is we're having to set these expectations. And it's really important that when we set these expectations that there's a shared understanding. So if you haven't done this before, this is a great opener, or some, formative assessment that you might want to do in your classroom with your students, and even ask yourself, and I'll let the mics open right now. What's your definition of learning? What do you think the role of the teacher is, and what's the role of the student? Anybody want to unmic themselves and come up with that? How they would define learning, or maybe what the role of the teacher or the role of the student is?
Okay, in my opinion, the role of the teacher is to build a classroom community where learning is accessible and the community can support each other in their learning. Okay, and then I would say that the students, it's their responsibility to, at the bare minimum, put in effort to gain new knowledge, but can also share that knowledge with others, obtain mastery, teach it to others, which, as we know, is true mastery.
I think if you took the time, and I'm going to challenge you guys to do this, to throw these questions out to your students. I don't care if you're kindergartner like Amy, or if you're all the way in high school like Nathan there, but oftentimes they'll say that the role of the student is, one, to show up, 2 is to not misbehave, and 3 is to be quiet. Those top 3 are going to show up every time, and those have nothing to do with learning. And so that's why it becomes really important for us to really start talking to our students about what the role of the teacher and the student is, because oftentimes I hear when we move to blended learning, and especially when we move to station rotation and some of the other blended models, students will go home and they'll say, my teacher didn't teach today. Well, you know what your teacher did? They set up learning environments, right? They set up a guide or a path or a roadmap for you to be successful. And that's the role of the teacher, is to set up that roadmap to really push those kids to be better and learn harder. And the role of the student is not just to show up and shut up, but it's to be active and engaged and to be challenged, right? It's those types of things. And I think that these are deep conversations that we need to have with our kids, because when we release the learning in a digital platform, oftentimes we get well, you didn't do your work, and how come I have to do all the work here? Well, because you're the learner, right? So it's having that conversation of us as being co-creators of that learning. And that becomes really important as you move through your adventures into blended learning. So have those conversations with your kids, because they're really, really important. And as we move from that teacher-centered, where we opened up the minds, not ever really, right, and poured stuff in, when everything was us, right? We provided all the knowledge. The students were passive receivers. We were the authority in the classroom. We had to know everything, right? And we were looking for correct answers and, those types of things. That was that teacher-centered. What we want to do is we want to move to more of a student-centered, right? So we want to take ourselves off the stage. Now, that doesn't change the roadmap and the guiding that we've been doing. We're still going to do it, but we're going to release the learning to the students. So they're constructing their knowledge, because we've done our good lesson planning and putting together the great digital content, or putting together collaborative groups and differentiating the learning, right? And our role changes from that leader to an authority to more of a facilitator. I like to say a lead learner, right? We're that learning partner. We're working with them. We don't have to know everything. Especially in this technology world, they're going to know how to make podcasts or videos probably a heck of a lot better than any of us, right? And where it changes, and this is the best part I absolutely love, is no longer are we trying to obtain correct answers, but we're posing questions and we're learning from our errors. We don't call them failures anymore. We call them our first attempt, our second attempt. Right? We don't call them failures. What we say is, oh, that's a great attempt. Let's try something again. And I don't remember if it's in this course, but if you've seen the learning curve, the learning pit by James Nottingham, that's a great place to help your kids understand that when they learn, they have to jump off into something they don't know, and they're going to be challenged, and they're going to have to pose questions, and they're going to have different type of strategies to come out of that, because they're going to have to continually self-assess and look at ongoing feedback that from them, from their peers, from you. I love the teaching by walking around, right? And it's more collaborative. It's more supportive. It's not like who's number one in the class, who got A's. It's like, oh, look at that cool product that you made. So it's a little different environment than what we've had before. And like I said, in this area, it's going to shift our practice, right? We're still going to be doing lesson plans, but we're guiding from the side. Before, we were delivering all the content. We're going to release some of that content delivery to our digital content partners, right? And we were doing assigning of all the activities. But you know what? Sometimes we can give students choice on those activities. We're still guiding and setting the parameters, right? And we're still assessing, even formative and summative. But really, we want the kids to do some self-assessment or peer assess. We want them to take responsibility. So it looks a little bit different when we get to the student-centered mind. Not only do the students' mindset have to change, but ours as teachers, our mindset has to change as well. So it's really that area about, yes, Benjamin Bloom, right? Right? I love it. He's probably one of my favorites. Dewey, another one, constructive, right? Constructivism, because that's really what you go back to, is we're letting kids construct their own learning, but we're still doing lesson plans, and we're still guiding the instruction, and we're still deciding what's the best content delivery, right? We're not asking them to go search. We're setting the guide rail. So it looks a little bit different in this digital world. So I just listened to Simon Sinek, and he just did a small video, and he said, you know, the pandemic has really made us think about things differently. And he said, instead of going back to what we were, which in this slide is stage one, where the teacher was directing all the learning, the students, you know, were not they were passive receivers. Let's just throw that aside and start anew. And if we're going to start anew, we'll all start at stage two. We'll all start by teaching by walking around. We'll all start with that teacher facilitation, so that our shift is more to a guide, right? Still doing our lesson plans and looking for partners that we can guide our students to delivery, right? So the students now, here comes the key, they start experimenting with ownership of their learning, not just showing up, shutting up, right? They're going to be like, dude, where do I need to go? And then they're going to have that ownership. So let's think through what that looks like. So as we move forward today in our station rotation, and as you stay with us through the different stages as we go through this blended learning series, start thinking about that teacher facilitation somewhere 3 years down the line, because it usually takes about 3 years to get our practice well. We might get to that co-facilitation, but we want to have a goal. So that could be our goal. Yes. So when you think of student ownership, and this is where you can really tell if your kids own them, you could ask them this question, right? If I go in and I do classroom walks, I'll always ask the students, I'm like, what are you learning? And then I'll ask, you know, why are you learning this? Right? So that they have an understanding of why they're learning it. And I might say, you know, how are the strategies that you're using right now support you getting to a successful level, right? And I might even ask them if they would ever use those strategies again. I happen to be a math person, so guess and check, right? Looking for patterns, you know, those types of things, I would be looking at those. But when we really think about student ownership, these are the things that students would be able to articulate. They may not be able to do it today, but if we go back to those early questions about the role of the teacher, the role of the student, and defining learning, I think we can get our kids here. I think we can get our kids here. So think about, what is it going to take for you to get there? And you know what? Instead of me talking about it, how about you all talk about it? Welcome back. Hope you guys had some really good conversations. Student-centered learning it's a mindset not only that our students have to have, but it's a mindset that you and I also need to have. So it's definitely one for us to chew on. I know 7 minutes isn't long enough, so hopefully you have some colleagues or peers at your school that you can chat about this, because I will tell you, if you go right back to where we started with today on asking those 3 questions to your students, what's the role of the teacher? What's the role of the students? And how do we define blended, or excuse me, learning, will be so evident and needed as you move forward in this blended learning environment. Thank you for taking the opportunity to share with your friends. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we came here today, because one of the things that, you know, we need to make sure that we all have the right mindset for student-centered learning. And like I was saying earlier, is it's a mindset, not only a shift for our students, but also a shift for ourselves. So as we move forward, and we're going to talk about blending via station rotation, it's probably one of the easiest ways to start blended learning is with the station rotation. It's the one that actually first came out when Clay Christensen's research was done way back, oh my gosh, you know what, now 15, almost 20 years ago, when they started noticing the technology in the classroom and the releasing to digital content. A lot of places were using station rotation because it's one of the first and easiest steps to make. So as we define blended personalized learning, I don't even just say blended learning. I always like to put in that term personalized. And this becomes really important, because what we want to do is we want to take your wisdom. You guys are super smart, right? Some of you even have master's degrees, right? And you know your standards inside and out. The kids don't, right? The computers don't, right? So you have this quality and this wisdom. And I've always been a fan of never take the teacher out of the classroom, right? You are the caring heart. You're the relationships. Remember, I talked about relationships comes before learning. So, but the technology, it has great opportunities to adapt the learning for each and every individual student. Now, if you were with me last month, you know that I always say that digital content can only get those low level learnings, recall, instruction, some of that low level Bloom's taxonomy, or if we were to talk in web step knowledge, we're just talking about, 1 and 2, just the low level. That's why we need the teacher there to help push our kids to those higher levels, because we know our standards are for those higher levels, right? And notice what happens here. If we can take and match the wisdom of the teachers with the adaptability of the technology, then we can create this personalized learning space for each and every individualized students. Now, these three icons, the teacher, the technology, and the student, become really important because as we move forward, you want to start thinking about the thirds. 1/3 of the time released to digital content, where students are working in the digital content independently 1/3 of the time, getting that low level instruction that you shouldn't have to do yourself. I was reading Michael's paper in the last class and he's like, I used to feel, guilty about giving the kids a video, but the kids liked the video and it freed him up to walk around the classroom, right? And 1/3 of the time releasing to your students. This is where we really get that relationships, where we can do that collaborative pair to pair, critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, using the academic vocabulary. Sometimes we throw some technology in there so that they can create, but we really want to get those students in relationships in that other third. And 1/3 of the time we guide. Sometimes that's Socratic seminar. Sometimes that's whole group. Sometimes that's small group, like we're going to talk about today as we do station rotation. So if you think of this, the three components that we just talked about, digital curriculum, right? Guided teacher instruction, and that peer-to-peer interactivities, that makes a great rotation. Now, the key here is that those rotations should all be on the same topic. I'll give you an example. I was down in Clark County and I walked into one of the teachers' classroom, an elementary teacher, and she had every station was about volcanoes. And this teacher had like 7 different stations going on. It was absolutely crazy, but they were all about volcanoes. So they had a common thread amongst all of them. Now, this teacher also wasn't afraid to realize that about 20 minutes into this station rotation, the kids were missing something. And so she just called them all to the floor. And this is where I like to call it catch and release, and did a little instruction, whole group, and then released them back out to their stations to continue their rotation. So the key here is, of course, the aligned common theme amongst the instructions. That means it's different than learning centers. Oftentimes in learning centers, we might be doing alphabet in one place, and we're going to be doing our vowels in another place, and we might be doing numeracy in another one. So that's how it's a little bit different. Station rotation is not a variety of activities in small groups, but it involves data-informed differentiation. And that's where it becomes a little bit different, and individualized pathways. So what does it look like to be data-informed? Well, I got to tell you, I was in Boston, and I went into this classroom that was doing station rotation. Great. I think it was 5th grade classroom. We walked into this classroom. She started with an assessment. It was like a 5-question Google form assessment she had the kids take. And by the scores in that assessment, she knew exactly what station to put them in. It was data informed. Now, she could have done that with previous information. She could have done that with some NAEP scores, but it was interesting because she did it right there in the immediate. And she said, okay, Sam, you're going to go to station 3. And just as their scores came in, she assigned their groups. It was amazing. I absolutely love that. So when we think about differentiation in student in station rotation, what we can differentiate is we can differentiate the content, what's learned. So different stations can have different levels of learning, because we know who our high flyers are and those babies that need our extra help, right? Or we can talk about how they learn things, because some students really need video. Some students can get away with text. Some students really need to process with their peers, or it can be the types of assignments or the products that they're expected to produce. Or again, going back to groups in our small groups, it can be the environment we put them in. They could be heterogeneously grouped, or they can be grouped by data or by the habits or the routines that we put in that environment. So when we think of station rotation, we have to think through how are we differentiating the learning, and that's the key. So when I look at these stations, we'll go back to that 3 stations that we just talked about a moment ago, right? One small group with a teacher, one group with their peer, and one group doing individualized digital content, right? So here I have A, B, and C. My A group are those students that I know that need the teacher to get started. So they're going to start with me. Now, my B group are those people that are capable of independence, yet they still need their teacher time. So I'm going to make sure that they get their teacher time second. That C group are my strong learners. I know that if they can get together with their peers, they can push each other to do really well. Then they can go to independent. And then the third rotation, they'll come to me. And that third rotation may look totally different than the rotation that you saw with one, because one was just really getting them started, right? In rotation 2, those were independent learners. So I could already do some pre-assessment to see what they've already learned on the digital content. But by that third rotation in the small group, that group of kids, I want them to teach me, because they've been learning it all along. So that even that teacher station can look different. So this is in our workshop, guys. So don't feel that you have to write this down. And please know that this webinar is being recorded, and you'll have it also in our Canvas course, and it'll show up on the state of Nevada's YouTube site. But when you think of your teacher stations, they don't all have to be the same. And I'm not a big fan of they all have to be the same amount of time either, because I can just pull a small group and I can do my small group for 5 minutes, send 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then I can send them off to a different small group or another rotation if we wanted to just say, oh, it's time for you to go to computers. And they could be doing computers alongside somebody else. But when you think about the small groups, what are some things that you can do? So like we talked about, that first group, I need to get them hooked, right? I need to get them started and modeling the instructions. So they might be doing that, what we have up here, number 1. But in the back, that last group that we were just talking about that had that third rotation, they might just be a quick assessment with a little bit of individual support. They might be more like that yellow column. Now, this comes out of an article from Catlin Tucker, and I'm sure some of you have heard of Catlin Tucker. She is station rotation queen. She comes out of California, an English teacher at one point in time. I know now she does lots of other things. But she did a lot of blended learning and station rotation. So over in chat, what are you right now, when you think of station rotation, is this new to you? Have you heard of it, but you've never done it? Have you tried it a few times, or is it a regular practice in your classroom? So good, we got some people here, and hopefully when you were in your groups, you were able to share some of your experience. And as you transition into the Canvas course, into the workshop area, hopefully you'll be able to share some of that information with each others. So I love it. Got a lot of 3s, a lot of 2s and 3s. So we want to push that to that regular practice. Now, I got to tell you, station rotation is a lot like fitness, right? When I go to the gym, I don't always work on my legs because, they would get tired and it would be boring. So the same thing with station rotation. It doesn't have to be a practice you do every day, right? You want to stretch and maybe do a catch and release, or maybe a Socratic seminar or something. So think through, it doesn't have to be every day, because your kids want a little spice in life as well. All right, so what does it look like to start planning for station rotation? So when we think about planning, I'm a big fan of backwards design. So figure out what are your identified, desired results. Right? So if I know big ideas and the skills that I want my kids to do, skills, that's low level stuff. So then I can start thinking, oh, what digital content can I release to do the skills? So that I can help carry, right, that DOK 3 and 4, that high order stuff. I can carry the big ideas and let the skills and practice be carried by my digital content. Then that's when I want to start thinking about, well, what kind of assessment tasks do I want so that the students have some evidence that shows me that they're learning it. Now, ideally, when you release to digital content, you do hopefully have some type of data that you can use to get back. So if I'm releasing to IXL, or if I'm releasing to ReadWorks, I'm getting some data that helps me through that. But I also want to have some type of culminating assessment, and it could be a ticket out the door, even if it's formative. It doesn't have to be summative, right? And then after we know all that, then we start planning the learning events. Now, I know teachers, we start down here at the bottom. I've seen it all the time, man. We start planning the learning events, and we haven't really thought about these 2 big ideas and what are some of the things and the steps we want to do before we figure out what our stations are. So start with that big idea. Figure out what that unit of study or that idea or topic that you want to do. Then figure out, how can I break it down? How can I break it down into digital learning component? How can I break it down into maybe a teacher small group? How can I break it down into maybe something where they're doing peer-to-peer? Now, I will tell you, when you start, what you're going to really want to do is maybe not have the teacher pull out right away, because you're still trying to teach your students what this might look like. So when you start, you might want to think about, okay, maybe I only want to have 2 groups. So here's 4 types of stations that you can think about, right? You could have independent work, what could be in a book, it could be, it's offline. You can have collaborative work, you can have teacher work, you can have digital instruction. What I say, if you haven't never done this before, like Mel, never tried it, right? I'm going to highly suggest take your room, split it in half, and say your half is going to work on digital learning, right? And this half over here is going to work on independent work, right? Put it so that they're successful and you're successful. So now you can do some teacher walking around. You can model what the expectations are. You can kind of control the environment a little bit, and also give those students some time to build up their ownership skills, because it's going to be new for them, just like it's new for you. So again, think about what type of stations that you want to have after you've decided what content you're going to be doing. I always say start whole group. You should always welcome your kids into the classroom. This is all about relationship building, and you should always close your classroom. You always want to close it. So think about how you can open and how you can close, and then put some stations in between. It doesn't mean that you can't do, like I told you a moment ago, like when I was talking about that volcano teacher who said at one point in time she did a catch and release. So she sent them all out to the stations, but she realized that, oh, we need to catch them. Brought them all back in, did a whole group thing, and then sent them back out to stations. So don't think that if you have a 90-minute block that it has to look like this. It can look differently. If you happen to have those 40-minute blocks, your rotations could be over various days. So again, start small. Start with 2 stations. That frees you up as a teacher to do teaching by walking around. When you feel comfortable, or the data shows that you really need to do that teacher pull-out station, and your kids have developed the ownership and the behaviors that allow you to release for them, then you can do that. Another thing you can do is you can limit the time. Your stations can be small, like the breakouts we have here in Zoom. It could be 5 to 7 minutes. And then, add them next time, it'll be 10 to 12 minutes. It doesn't have to be the whole class period. Starting small so that they can have, successes along the way. We want to definitely bring in that digital content, right? So that they have their personalized learning space. We have data to help drive instruction, and we definitely want to keep that relationships going with their peer-to-peer. So try to get that peer-to-peer in there as well, and then closing the classroom. So in the Canvas course, you are going to see some lesson planning activities. There's a station rotation one. I think there's a flex one. They're all in the resource areas. So you notice here, I have station 1 is tech infused, station 2 small group, station 3 is a teacher led. This is just one way of planning. If you do a Google, I've seen people, instead of doing it horizontal or vertical like you see here, they do their groups in a horizontal. It's easier for them. So I don't care what lesson format that you give it to me, I just provide one for you. But you'll notice at the very, very bottom is, what data are you collecting? How do you know that your students are progressing? That becomes really important, right? And at the top is, what was our goal? Go back to backward design. What was our goal? Right? How are we going to open whole group? How are we going to close whole group, so that we know that our students have progressed well? So again, you heard me say earlier, if I had a shortened period like that 43-minute class period that I had at SECTA, I might do my rotations, set them up, but I might just have groups doing different rotations on different days. So one group would do rotation A on Tuesday, and then rotation B on Wednesday, and rotation C on Thursday. And the others would have, BCA, and the others one would have CAB. So you see how that, and I can pull small groups, right? Notice what I have here is A, B, and C: a spiral review, digital learning, and collaborative. I do not have a teacher small group in that. So what that allows me to do is, I have 1, teaching by walking around, or 2, I can say I need, and rattle off 6, 7 names or 3 names to come to small group. And then I can release them back out to their station. So that time can vary. So think about not always having the same amount of time, especially in your teacher group, because it's not about equal. It's about equitable time with the teacher. And you and I know that students need different amounts of times with us. Now, before you start this, I know it's very, very exciting. I know it's exciting. You definitely want to put some routines and procedures and expectations in place. That's why I say start small. Ask yourself, what is going to help you to transition the kids? How are they going to get the materials out to the kids? For me, for transitions, I'm a callback queen. I love to do callbacks. Like I'll say, when I say mighty, you say Mustangs. I'll say mighty, Mustangs, mighty, Mustangs, mighty, real loud. And then the kids will say Mustangs real loud, right? So having those transitions, and you'll notice that's a kind of long transition because it gives students enough time, even if you do the hear me, if you hear me clap once, if you hear me clap twice, if you hear me clap 3 times, it gives the kids enough time to wrap up what they're doing, especially in the digital learning environment, to give you their full attention. And if you practice slant or champs, those are other ways that you can put some routines in there. So you want to have those callback responses, right? And then you might want to make sure that you have expectations. What is the procedure? If I was a young kid, I might have the kids line up, and as they move, because oftentimes in our elementary classroom, they physically move. But in high school, I might not have the kids move. I might have portable signs like those 4 stations I just showed you a moment ago. I might have signs and I'll just pick one up. It's a yellow sign, puts it on a desk that says you're now doing digital learning. Pick up the other sign and drop it onto another one that says you're now doing collaborative. Because those kids, man, they nest in their desks. They don't want to go anywhere, right? And then the other thing you want to do, especially if you're going to have a teacher station where you're pulling kids, you want to have procedures on how to ask for help. And you guys probably seen the rules like ask 3 before me, right? And I've seen classrooms where they have a student that's assigned to support, where they'll actually say, Tommy, today you on this rotation, you are the support person. If anybody has any questions, Tommy can help you, and especially with the tech. So think through what those types of expectations are. If you go into our Canvas course, it's a much clearer, some more questions for you to have those things. So as we think about station rotation, again, at the top here, I have a theme in the literature book. So she's got a theme playlist that she's got the kids doing Study Island. Collaboration statement where they're practicing and applying theme on short passages with partners. The teacher station, she's coming in and she's doing a star mark test with them and working towards thematic essays, right? So she's got it all planned out. Now, what she could do and what you could do is you could do directions. Like last week, I told you guys I was up in Anchorage. We did small groups. We did 2 small groups. And instead of me telling the directions every period, because we had a rotation within periods for our professional learning up there, I actually just recorded the directions. It was like 90 seconds of directions for each of the 2 stations. But that meant I saved 3 minutes of explaining, and they can do it independently and watch the directions over and over again. And I also wrote it out in text. It was in a Canvas class, right? So I can do the small recording. I can text out what the directions are. I could do an audio, right? Those are kind of nice ways. So one way of doing it is making sure that the kids have all the expectations. You'll notice at the top here, it's going to be 20 minutes. They're going to follow all the directions at their station. Now, what does that mean? How are you going to get them directions, right? I've seen people type them up and have them on a page, and you've seen those stand-up cards that you can put, like, oh, these are your stations. I've used Microsoft has these recipe cards. I absolutely love them. They have templates for recipe cards, and I turned it into a station rotation recipe. This is the materials that you need. This is a step 1, 2, 3, 4, and this is how you assess and how we know you did well. So that's one way of doing your directions. Now you have to ask who's in what group. I like to use colors because colors don't indicate smart, not smart, need extra help, whatever. You could, use colors. You could use your school colors. You could use your favorite football team's colors. And so making sure that the kids know what their colors are. And this can change. That's the nice thing is, Lacey, who's at the bottom of green, can move over to yellow tomorrow. She doesn't know, or maybe Miguel might move over to red. Who knows? Because it gives you, with your data, you have that opportunity. But before you start stations, think about how are you going to assign your groups. Now, when you first start, you might just say the left half of the room is going to do this, the right half of the room is going to do this, or these 3 tables, just do some heterogeneous grouping. But somewhere when you start getting your data, you're going to want to set that up. Then you're going to want to show them what their rotations are. I have not even started with instruction yet. These are 3 slides that you would probably have to show your kids so they know where they're going, right? Or you could put them in Canvas so they know exactly how long they're spending in each rotation. The yellow group is going to do tech and then collaboration and then teacher. Green group down at the bottom is going to do collaboration, teacher, and tech. Goes back to that one slide that we saw earlier. So it really becomes important that we have these layout, these directions for our students to know where they're supposed to go. Now, I'm a big fan of ownership and management. I love classroom screen. So notice what I've done with this classroom screen. I've told them what sound level that we want to be, right? So if we were doing champs, I might say you're level, you're level 1, right? And then I've noticed here that the groups are going to complete digital learning, peer activities, small group teacher workstation, and I've given a timer there. This is so that they can help manage their own time as well. Right? I'm going to tell them when there's 2 minutes left of time. I'm going to tell them when there's 30 seconds because we'll want to help them manage because it's still new to them, but they can always look up and see their own time. They don't have to just wait for a bell like Pavlov's dog. So again, when you get started, create the systems, practice the systems, right? If I had some middle school kids, I might say, we're going to do a station rotation. Let's go ahead and see how fast we can move. Everybody's going to move in a rotation clockwise, or everybody's going to move. No lessons or anything going on. Just practice the movements, practice the chants, practice those types of things. Start small. Just a couple stations, limit group sizes. Even though you're going to take half your class and you're going to be doing collaboration, say, I only want you working in groups of 3. I only want you working in groups of 4, even though it's half the class. I don't want a group any bigger than 3 or 4. Shorter time frames, we talked about that earlier. Start with 7 minutes, build up to 12 minutes, build up to 20 minutes. You're going to probably want to have some checkpoints and stuff in there. You want to help them build their ownership. And think about not having a teacher station right away so that you can do that teaching by walking around and monitoring behavior and expectations, because our key here is number 3, building student ownership. Well, guys, it was an absolute pleasure being with you guys tonight. I will see you in Canvas. I can't wait to see your implementations.